Welcome to you all. Many of you probably know one of the great traditions in Tibet is that of debating, dialectics. So in the service of that tradition, we have 4 great scholar experts here who are going to engage His Holiness in discussion. And each one of them will speak initially, tell us a little bit about their background, their line of inquiry for 3 minutes, and then we are going to mix it up. So I introduce to you first Professor Duncan Williams, who's a professor of Japanese Buddhism at Berkeley, but excitingly is joining the USC faculty this fall.
Well, good afternoon. First, let me thank His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his lecture this morning, which was not only inspiring, but contained much to consider regarding the notion of secular ethics, the theme for this afternoon. As a scholar of religious studies and Japanese Buddhism in particular, what is most fascinating to me is that the Dalai Lama would be at all interested in secular ethics. His Holiness is a very obviously religious person, and yet he wants to articulate a non-religious ethic, set of ethical standards that serves humanity as a whole. As a Buddhist, I recognize much in the Buddhist tradition that resonates with His Holiness's secular ethics, and like to begin today with a reflection on a Japanese Zen Buddhist text from the 13th century, the Tenzo Kyokun, literally instructions to the Zen cook, that characterizes the essentials of Buddhist ethics, as well as suggests that in any effort to move beyond oneself, one necessarily draws on elements of oneself. The author of the text, the Zen master Dogen, writes about the role of the head cook in a Zen monastery. And in addition to outlining cooking techniques and duties of the monastic kitchen, he proposes 3 essential attitudes that a great cook must have. First, the cook must know exactly what is in the kitchen. He or she must have a precise inventory of all the ingredients. Second, a great cook will not waste anything in the kitchen. A mediocre cook can create a great meal with wonderful ingredients, but a great cook is supposed to be able to produce an excellent meal, even with mediocre ingredients. Third, a cook should be focused on cooking not for him or herself, but to sustain the spiritual and physical well-being of everyone else in the monastery. Like many Buddhist texts, this cooking manual is really not just about cooking. Metaphorically, the cook stands for all Buddhists. The kitchen is one's heart and mind. The ingredients include both the wholesome and not so wholesome elements of ourselves. And cooking for the service of others in the monastery is about dedicating one's talents, one's ingredients as it were, for the benefit of others, not just oneself. What the text suggests is that in any effort to serve others, one necessarily draws on available ingredients. And naturally, His Holiness's effort to give the world a secular ethics is going to include some ingredients that come from his Buddhist heritage. What the Tenzo Kyokun also describes are 2 critical aspects of the Buddhist way of life: deeply realizing one's true nature, or wisdom, and dedicating oneself in service to others, compassion. Wisdom and compassion are often thought to be so significant to living a Buddhist life that they're compared to 2 wings of a bird. One alone is not enough. Only with both wings is one able to fly to freedom. An ethical life in Buddhism is thus intrinsically linked to liberation. One doesn't live an ethical life for the sake of living an ethical life, but because it's linked to a Buddhist notion of freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from suffering, both physical and mental, in both its avoidable and unavoidable aspects in life. In this sense, when His Holiness, in his formulation of secular ethics, refers to a universal and basic human condition that seeks happiness and the alleviation of suffering, it resonates easily for Buddhists, because at the root of the 2,500-year history of that tradition, alleviating suffering is a common goal for all Buddhists despite the many lineages and sublineages of that religion. A second key to understanding the Buddhist approach to ethics is the notion of interconnectedness. In the tradition, one of the most eloquent descriptions of how individuals are interconnected with each other is found in a vision of the world called the jewel net of Indra, wherein the world was created by the god Indra metaphorically as a net or a web that extends infinitely in every direction, suspended with a jewel at every knot of the net. These jewels, it is said, act like mirrors, reflecting the other jewels in the net. And given the net's extension in every direction infinitely, each jewel reflects all the other jewels in this vast network of existence. These individual jewels, or beings, like individual human beings or animal or plant beings, live distinct lives, not autonomous independent beings, but as identities interconnected with every other being. One could say this is the Buddhist vision of the universe as an interconnected ecosystem-like network where what happens to one part of the net invariably is reflected in and impacts other parts of the net. In the Buddhist view of the self-other relationship, the self is constituted of the other. So the ethical behavior that benefits the other ultimately benefits oneself, and behavior detrimental to the well-being of others ultimately is detrimental to oneself. Clearly, this is compatible with His Holiness's view that in an increasingly globalized world, the lives of all beings are enmeshed with each other. Finally, Buddhism proposes an ethics that is situational. Buddhist ethics is most often formulated as a set of precepts that the clergy or lay people adhere to. Many of the basic precepts, such as not killing, not lying, and not stealing, are identical or very similar to the moral formulations found in other religions. What I mean by situational is that the Buddhist approach to adhering to precepts relies to a great extent on the intent of actors and of particular situations one finds oneself in. His Holiness describes one such situation in his book, Ethics for the New Millennium, a situation where a gunman is killing and chasing innocent people. One innocent runs by you with the gunman falling close behind. You're asked by the gunman where the person went. And His Holiness asks us whether it's more important to keep the ethical precept of not lying or the precept of not killing when it seems clear that to tell the gunman the truth will most likely result in the killing of that person. This example reveals that there's a certain flexibility and a corresponding responsibility to carefully weigh ethical decisions. A well-known Zen Buddhist teacher has described Buddhist precepts as guideposts, something akin to the North Star that might guide you in the right direction. The goal is not to get to the North Star, there's no oxygen there, but to use the North Star to move north. Similarly, ethics is not the goal, rather you use ethics to move towards freedom. The Buddhist approach to ethics is therefore neither absolutist nor completely relativistic, but has a built-in system of flexibility which seems compatible with His Holiness's approach to secular ethics. Although there are some questions about whether all religious persons can be persuaded to embrace His Holiness's approach, we must commend the effort of one of the world's most important religious leaders to engage contemporary issues and perspectives, reaching across the lines of science, religion, and culture. And to the extent that his message resonates with non-Buddhists, we must applaud his earnest search for common values for the sake of addressing both fundamental and timely issues. Thank you.
Our next speaker is probably known to many of you, Gideon Yaffe, who teaches philosophy and law here at USC, and who's worked particularly on the philosophical foundations for the law and issues of identity, free will, and intention. Professor Yaffe.
I guess it would almost go without saying what an honor it is to share the stage with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's really hard to overstate how happy I am about that. I work at the intersection of philosophy and law, particularly criminal law. And I am particularly interested in the ways in which philosophical thought about intention and agency, free will, personal identity does and ought to inform our criminal law. So one of the things about His Holiness's thought that I'm most interested in is his thinking about the nature of human beings, about what a human being is, what it is for a human being to act, what kinds of control we have and lack over our conduct and the relevance of those claims to his ethical positions. So I'm hoping that we'll get some chance to talk about that today. To give you just some idea of the kinds of things I'm interested in, we make a distinction both in morality and in the law between intentional harming and inadvertent harming. Harming somebody on purpose versus harming them because you're too careless. And although both these things are bad, we usually think that intentional harming is worse. And there's a deep question as to why that is. What is it about intentional harming that makes it worse? And it probably has something to do with the nature of intention. Another example, we often draw a distinction between doing something bad, and helping somebody to do something bad, where in some circumstances it can be worse to help than to have done it yourself. The case of Osama bin Laden might be an example of that. In other cases, it goes the other direction. In other cases, it looks worse to do than to help. And why is that? It must have something to do with what human beings are, about what it is to help, about what kinds of facts about human beings are morally and ethically significant. So now, my interests in law, in particular, make me particularly interested in articulating the content of a secular ethics in contrast to a religious ethics. In part, this is because it seems to me that a state is legitimate when it exercises power against one of its citizens. It's legitimate only to the degree to which it can address that citizen and explain to that citizen why that citizen is deserving of the particular harm that the state is giving, in the form of punishment, in the form of incarceration, perhaps even in the form of the death penalty. We need to be able to, if we're going to think of incarcerating people as something justified, we need to be able to see the state as having something to say in its favor, something that the citizen who is going to receive that punishment should, at least, recognize as being just. But we're also a religiously pluralistic nation. And we value our religious pluralism, at least I do, and I know many people do. And so we want a criminal law, a law generally, that can address people of all religions, that can be in a position to explain to anyone, this is why you deserve punishment for this form of wrongdoing, no matter what religion you are. And this form of justification to citizens, independent of whatever their religious positions are, is something that I think it's extraordinarily important that we have, and which I really believe we could not have if religion was necessarily a part of ethics, if it necessarily informed the content of ethical norms. So I applaud His Holiness's desire to articulate the content of a secular ethics, and I wonder whether it's true and whether it makes sense, and that's something that I'm hoping we'll explore today.
Thank you so much. I'll just introduce you. Coming up now is Professor Jonathan Haidt, who teaches psychology at Virginia, who's worked a lot on the emotional basis of ethics, and who said that one of his main missions, and I think this chimes with His Holiness, is to help us understand the moral motivations of people we see as an enemy. And he has a new book coming out next January, just in time for the coming election, called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. Professor Haidt. Haidt.
Oh, okay,
There.
yeah, I think that was right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Well, thank you, Pico. One cannot pay for publicity that good, and it is such an honor to be here, Your Holiness, and in this panel. For 40 years, evolutionary theorists have told us that human nature is basically selfish. Many people knew in their hearts that this wasn't true, and few have been as eloquent as His Holiness in arguing for a very different conception of human nature. In Ethics for the New Millennium, His Holiness writes that basic human nature is not only nonviolent, but actually disposed toward love and compassion, kindness, gentleness, and affection. This view is more inspiring, but is it really true? My research team at yourmorals.org has tried to identify the innate and universal foundations of ethics upon which societies build their various moral matrices. We believe that there are 6, of which care and compassion is only one. There's also fairness, liberty, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. We've been very influenced by recent work in evolutionary theory, showing that cooperation is in fact a basic principle of evolution. But cooperation turns out to be intimately linked to competition. The only times you find extraordinary levels of cooperation in the animal kingdom are in animals that live together as a group, die together as a group, and live by competing successfully with other groups. Examples include bees, ants, termites. Humans show this pattern also. We are often very altruistic, yes, but our altruism is conditional. It is easily activated towards our families, our friends, and our teammates. It is easily elicited by people who are similar to us. This is called parochial altruism, that is, altruism directed towards our parish, our group. From an evolutionary perspective, parochial altruism makes a lot of sense. From an evolutionary perspective, it is impossible to imagine how we could have evolved the capacity for unconditional, universal love of all mankind. Such a universal love is not impossible. There are people who've done it. We think of Mother Teresa, we think of His Holiness. But just look at how we respond to such people. We revere them precisely because they have transcended human nature. They have acted in ways that the rest of us find superhuman. So, do these exemplars show us the way forward to a secular ethics? Can we all be like them? I believe that any plan for a future secular ethics that relies on us getting 3% of the human population to be as selfless and loving as these exemplars is doomed to failure. From the French Revolution, through the Russian Revolution, to the dreamers of the 1960s, moral visionaries have tried to create a new ethics, a secular ethics, by changing human nature, creating a new kind of human being. They have all failed, and until we get really, really good at genetic manipulation, they will all fail. As a social psychologist, I do not believe that you can change human society by changing human beings, by changing human nature. A painful lesson that we have learned in psychology is this. Big, expensive interventions to try to train people to act differently inevitably yield very disappointing results if they yield results at all. Just look at programs designed to teach ethics to MBAs. Look at programs designed to promote healthy eating habits. Even if you want to change and believe that you ought to change, the results of these programs are typically nil. But an optimistic lesson that we have learned is that you can get huge changes in behavior by making small changes in environments. For example, if you put a pair of eyes, just you draw eyes or an image of eyeballs on a computer screen while people are taking a test, they're more honest. It activates the idea that somebody's watching. If you put healthy food in the most visible locations in the cafeteria, and you put the unhealthy stuff, you have to walk to it or you don't see it right away, well, that produces a big increase in healthy eating. So if you want to make people more ethical or healthier, try these indirect methods. Don't educate them on the benefits of the program that you are pushing. Your Holiness has spent a great deal of time talking with neuroscientists. These exciting collaborations are yielding great insights for basic science. But if your goal is actually to increase compassion and altruism in the world, I urge you to begin talking to us social psychologists. I think we can do a much better job for you. I'll wait. I really want him to get this. Okay. Okay. So we do not try to change people. We try to change environments, which then act indirectly to change people's behavior. I believe, please. I believe the Irish philosopher Edmund Burke was correct when he said, "We cannot change the nature of things and of men, but must act on them the best we can." I urge you to talk to us. We'd be glad to help. Thank you.
I'm guessing nearly everybody here knows our final speaker, Antonio Damasio, who's university professor at USC, David Dornsife, professor of neuroscience, director of the Brain and Creativity Institute, and of course whose work in the neural basis of emotions and the part that emotions play in decision-making has really changed the nature of neuroscience and perhaps philosophy too. The one other thing I'll tell you is that he once, 23 years ago, participated in a similar discussion on contemplation and consciousness with His Holiness here in California, and that was the week His Holiness won the Nobel Prize. So Professor Damasio is a good luck charm as well as a world-class neuroscientist.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Your Highness. So let me, since this is a conversation about secular ethics, let me begin with the general perspective on moral or ethical behaviors. As a neurobiologist, I regard them as special cases of social behavior. What makes them special is, in fact, their topic. Matters of great import, such as disease and death, and the attending pain and suffering, health and flourishing, and the attending joy and happiness, truth, lying, justice. But it is the topic that modifies social behaviors and makes them into moral or ethical behaviors. Then let me allude to a few facts from cognitive neuroscience that I think are relevant to this discussion. Fact number one, social emotions, which is one of the main categories of emotion, are natural carriers of moral values and actions. For example, when, as a result of infringing an ethical rule, we react with shame, embarrassment, or guilt, we are in fact inflicting punishment on ourselves. When, for example, as a result of seeing somebody infringe an ethical rule, we react with contempt and indignation, we are, in fact, responding to that violation by inflicting punishment on another. And pretty similarly, this happens with compassion, whether it is for a physical predicament or a mental predicament, where the emotion of compassion delivers consolation and targeted help. And it happens with admiration, whether it is for a virtuous act or for virtuosity, where in fact we deliver, by our emotional reaction, we deliver rewards for those who so behave. Fact number two. Non-human species, and especially mammals, and especially primates within mammals, exhibit social emotions in spades. Examples: compassion for physical predicaments, outrage at injustices in the distribution of rewards. And so it is quite likely that when we talk about social emotions in general, we talk about sets of behaviors and strategies that were planted in the mammalian brain by the genome, even if they can certainly be tuned by learning, especially in humans. Fact number three, adult neurological patients, when they sustain damage to a confined part of their frontal lobe, very specific part, become unable to use social conventions and obey ethical rules, although they retain knowledge about those social conventions and those rules. Worse, when comparable damage occurs in the early years of life, for example in children up to age 3 or 4, it so happens that not only is there a resulting abnormal moral behavior, but the children are unable to learn the conventions and rules to begin with. So, in both adults and children, the most blatant sign outside of their impaired moral behavior is actually a lack of social emotions. That should be food for thought. I don't mean at all that the result of these experiments and studies should tell you that there is a moral center, something like an encapsulated module that is there to give you moral behavior. We know that that's not the case. We know that there is in fact a system of which this area is a part, and we know that in normal individuals, learning can influence the operations of that particular region. Still, it is very important to know that it is there, that it is specific, and that this kind of impairment cannot occur with damage anywhere else in the brain. So let me conclude by saying that The goal of moral behaviors is essentially regulatory. We are regulating behaviors such that there are benefits to the self or to the nearby kin or to others that are more distant, and the degree of benefit varies tremendously with the different behaviors. For example, in extreme kin altruism, it may not benefit the self at all directly, but it will benefit for certain the kin and others in the group. Now, the biological function that best captures what is going on in moral behaviors is actually homeostasis. That is, in plain terms, life regulation. And I would like to say that there are two kinds of homeostasis. One that is very basic, the one that is really given by our genome and that ensures the welfare of the self and the welfare of the next of kin, and rarely does it ever go beyond that. But then there's another kind of homeostasis, which I like to call sociocultural homeostasis, and that developed because human brains were able to generate cultures once they were immersed in a collective of other human beings, and through those cultures it was possible to reflect on moral knowledge. It was possible to structure that moral knowledge in such a way that it would result not only to the benefit of the immediate self and the next of kin, but also to many others further away in the larger circle of humanity. In other words, ethics is not just about what came naturally, and to begin with, certainly it is about what came naturally through our genomes and our biology. It is also about what cultural humans were able to create, although on the blueprint of one's biology, and were able to agree upon themselves. Thank you.
And I'd just like to say for my part, I've been lucky enough to be talking and listening to His Holiness for 37 years now. And I think one of the things that has most moved and instructed me is his emphasis on secular ethics. And as you heard, some of you this morning, the sense that even if somebody has no religion, she can still at any moment lead a kinder, clearer, more attentive life. And I think in the world that sometimes seems ever more polarized, to have a deeply committed, very visible Buddhist monk who calls himself a defender of Islam, who delivers long lectures on the Gospels to groups of Christians, who's lived most of his life in a largely Hindu nation, who looks to Jewish friends and rabbis for counsel, and most of all, who delights in talking with scientists and philosophers, some of whom may proudly say they have no religion. That itself, I think, offers us an interesting model. So I'd like to begin, Your Holiness, to see if you have any responses to the provocative comments that we've heard so far.
되게 당구대한테 가르쳐서 맨잡시.
So in your presentation, you emphasized the place of recognizing the interconnectedness of things from the Buddhist point of view, from the Japanese perspective, Buddhist perspective.
There are also, I think, again, two levels. One, the biological sort of level, which is taking care. For example, the mother taking full care about their youngster. 아마랑이 마음배 미진하려 디 판도 연구를 삼네 디 뒤죽 좀제 통화통에 러시아지 연도하고래 이네 슈체디 된중 뒤죽이 좀제디 개 마신바 그런 든두즈 매 풀 자와샤스인데 그 바이올로지컬 랑부터네 제마도 뒤죽게지 시엔이 배지 말해.
So in relation to the connection between recognition of the interconnectedness on the one hand and one's compassionate behavior on the other, let us take the example of a mother's sense of care and love for her offspring, a child. In some cases, or animals. So in the case of human beings, in some cases it is conceivable that some mothers may be consciously thinking about how this, children's welfare is intimately connected with my welfare down the line, so I must take care. But in most cases, it's a very instinctive, response in the face of a need of a child.
I think at the initial stage, just birth, just after born, I think immediately is a mother sort of affection, like other animal. Not thinking, long run, that may, when I get very old, my sort of livelihood depend on them. I don't think.
So there is no awareness of the interdependence, interconnectedness of the welfare of the two.
But then later, of course, thinking more long term, then of course the awareness, my interest depend on them. Their interest depend on me. That dependency, that mainly come from intelligence level. So that's my view. 다전에 수시해서 공기직 시에서 가르쳤을 때 in Tibet, sometimes I think it's just like sort of the story. Chetim, you are saying. Chetim.
In Tibet, there's a kind of folk saying that even among the birds, there is a kind of a law.
Cuckoo is the sort of what's the judge.
Judge.
So I don't think, beside a human being, I think other species of mammals, I don't think any concept of law. Concept of law, I don't think, except a human being.
Would you say that the concept of law and justice is very specific to human species?
So there may be a difference between the concept of law and the concept of justice in this respect. But the notion of law, I think, is quite specific to human beings.
Justice, law, law.
But in an ideal world, the law is supposed to reflect that sense of justice.
That is certainly true.
I think some law is a party law. That's a little different. But general law, I think beside Kasoda, completely beside political party or some political interest.
It has to be independent of the political interest of different ideologies. Yeah?
So that, suppose justice.
Justice, based on justice. Yeah.
Protection of
justice.
I think that's right. I mean, there's a variety of ways in which we give control over the administration of justice to our government for good reason.
Then perhaps I think some animal, I think like dog or even cat, in order to protect their own group, the more stronger one is to come forward. That the protects justice.
There seems to be some kind of expression of a sense of justice or fairness when protecting a group against another one.
Perhaps I think we can examine dogs. Stronger dog is a bully or weaker dog. Some may come to help. They just
Seems to be maybe related.
But how much intelligence there? I think animal also, I believe, some very tiny insect may not use that because of that capacity. But generally, I think some limited. What do you think? Brain specialist. And animal also have this sort of
yes.
Some limited intelligence or not?
The brain specialist agrees. There's something that we can, I would add, for example, the idea that animals can take care of their progeny, of their children, very, very well, is, of course, quite strong and correct. But we actually know right now something very interesting about that. If you take a kind of rodent known as a prairie vole, I can show you a picture, but don't worry, it looks a little bit like a rat. And if the prairie vole actually has such a complex behavior in terms of how the female prairie vole deals with its pups and deals with the husband, that in fact, once the children are born, not only does the mother take care of the children very carefully, but the father does too. And the prairie vole, male and female, are in fact wed for life, and they don't separate ever. Now, we know that,
some birds.
right, and we know that this behavior is entirely related to the release of a neuropeptide with the name of oxytocin. And we even know that there is a gene that is in charge of the control of the release of oxytocin. And if you block that gene, all of this behavior falls apart. And in fact, the two prairie voles don't mate for life, and they do not take care of their offspring. So I entirely agree. But one thing that is interesting in the question that you asked to my colleague to the left is there law in animals? And there is some kind of rule obeyance, but it does not mean that that rule is ever reflected upon and is ever codified. And I think the great big distinction between ethics and moral behaviors that are part of the larger realm of social behaviors is that we as humans have the possibility of reflecting on the knowledge, organizing it and structuring it for, as you do, the greater good. And that's something that is outside of the realm of animals.
So definitely, law and also justice. I think very much related with moral ethics. I feel like that, and also the social way.
Social nature of our species.
가다 양식을 날 배지 프로젝트를 받아. 디지도 나도 배지 프로젝트에서 스페셜 something.
So in fact, one could view the emergence of, the basis of the emergence of law and justice is in kind of social terms of trying to create a mechanism that would protect us and promote our well-being.
That's why I talked about regulatory and the idea that everything that happens in moral behavior, or we hope at least that everything that should happen in moral behavior has a regulatory goal. That's what the machine ends up being put together to do. And of course, lots of times things go awry and you don't achieve that goal, but that's another story.
And goals also, temporary goal, long-term goal.
I wonder if I could ask His Holiness a question about that relationship between human beings and the animal world in terms of the limits of ethical behavior. It seems to me that in the Buddhist tradition, sometimes when we have these precepts about not killing, or that is fundamentally based on not creating more suffering, but alleviating suffering, and that all those beings that can feel suffering, sometimes we express it as sentient beings, animals, and in some traditions even plants, that we try to extend our ethical behavior to include all sentient beings, not just human beings. And I wonder if His Holiness would be willing to talk a little bit about what is the limits of our ethical behavior.
I think restrain harming others, including killing. I think two reasons, two categories. One, for one's own sort of personal benefit. If you do harm, I will suffer. If I help other, if I bring some sort of happiness or benefit to other, I get benefit. Mainly, that is the sort of motivation, and you should restrain harming other. That's one category. Another category, mainly the object side. They also have the right, like me, to survive and to get happiness or a happy life. So if I harm, I disrespect their right. So that's one reason. So two categories. Shan kasorbuge shan sewa wangi shan naba tombashik. Rang dunzedu shani shan naba tombashik yidwa.
So when we talk about ethical behavior, essentially we are talking about a sense of refraining from harming others. And that act itself may be the same, but depending upon ethical action, ethical behavior.
Action.
Insofar as the act is concerned, is the same, but the underlying motivation from which that act is coming may be different. In one case, it could be a more self-regarding motivation where you feel that if I harm others, I'm going to be harmed in the process. If I benefit others, I'll gain benefit as a consequence. So that kind of self-regarding consideration can also serve as a basis for ethical action. But then there could be another kind of motivation where the motivation is to purely out of compassion for the need and welfare of this other object, you engage in that act of either helping or refraining from harm. So at the level of behavior, there is no distinction, but at the level of underlying motivation, there is a distinction.
And also one, my Muslim friend, according to him, a genuine Islam practitioner must respect right of all creatures, because same Allah created. So we must extend our love towards entire creatures. So different reason, but more or less, you see that, because of the same outcome. Then I think within that, the different attitude towards human life and other life. So, shall I say, that pleasure, shall I never do that? Pleasure, mid
So if we are talking about ethical behavior motivated from this true compassion, then on that level, there shouldn't be any distinction between whether the object of the concern is a human being or a non-human sentient being.
And again, now here is some difference in religious sort of concept. We human beings have the soul. Animals, no soul. So there's some differences. You see, as this morning I mentioned,
Yes.
There are two levels of sort of sense of concern or compassion. One, biological factor. One biological factors of compassion take as a seed, then use human intelligence, the pros and cons are there. Pros and cons, then you see increase that feeling of sense of concern of others' well-being. So first level come out of, I think both, come out of selfish. One, self-cherishing here. If I do harm, I will suffer. If I do help other, I get benefit. Then long term. Now here, this morning I mentioned the biological factor or level of compassion, mainly a biological factor, mainly oriented towards others' attitude. This person or this group of people, nice to me. So I develop sense of concern towards them. Another, now a kind of another level of sort of sense of concern, which come develop with help of intelligence. Now, say, enemy, also part of the community, part of the humanity, or some group of people who really harm on you, but they also part of we. So now we can say our world. I think all American. I think because of that, naturally, you see, can say our world, isn't it? America kind of we American janjar thumundo.
For example, for Americans too, you don't need to always say we Americans. We can also say our world. We the members of the world.
When we talk about global warming, and our world, not American world, or neither Tibetan world. So it is fact. We are part of the world. So now, particularly now, in today's sort of reality, and global economy, and global warming, it's everything interdependent. The American sort of healthy environment, it cannot build by American itself. It depends on other continent. And American economy also depends on other. So, aware that fact, that reality. So, entire world is part of America, part of we, American, part of American, part of we. So, on that basis, develop genuine sense of concern of other. That also, you see, developed by ultimately selfish. So, I usually make distinction. Foolish selfish and wise selfish. Foolish selfish, just look round. Then some of the people, all this is the same sort of your surrounding, but some people, my friend, very close. Some people, my enemy, fight. That is foolish selfish. And look wider. This also, although occasionally irritates me, but still part of me. I have to take care. And the possibility is always there. If I take care, sincerely, respect them, eventually there is real possibility. These today sort of, because of the troublemaker for you, eventually may become good friend. Similarly, your friend, today very close friend, and then eventually more competition, then that brings suspicion, that brings sort of distrust. And today's best friend also, you see, this possibility one day become troublemaker. So thinking more holistic way, no reason to extreme sort of closeness feeling, extreme distance. It's not human way of thinking. Human intelligence there. We must think the holistic, both selfish conscious one.
Both can be understood from the point of view of self-interest.
And furthermore,
without some kind of self-centeredness that cares for your own well-being, there's no basis to be able to empathize with others' needs.
Okay. Well, this is an empirical claim. This is a claim about what ultimately is best for people. one of the reasons that you are so esteemed among scientists is that you have shown a commitment to empirical truth, to whatever is revealed you will accept, whatever is revealed by methods of science you will accept. You say that it is foolish selfishness to focus on your group and that it is wise selfishness to focus on everyone, but that is an empirical claim. That might be false. People might do much better for themselves if they focus on people close to them and their groups, not on all of humanity. I'd like to read you a quote I found recently from Adam Smith, the philosopher, who, of course, the founding philosopher of capitalism, but who also wrote in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a very important work in moral psychology. He wrote a defense of parochialism. He wrote, "The wisdom that contrived human affections," in other words, God, the deist sort of God, "the wisdom that contrived human affections seems to have judged that the interest of mankind would be best promoted by directing the attention of each individual to that particular portion of it which was most within the sphere both of his abilities and his understanding." So Smith's point is that if we all think about all of humanity, very little care will be given. But if we all think about our families, and sometimes our neighborhoods, and occasionally our country, overall, there will be a lot more care, a lot more altruism, a lot more cooperation, a lot more happiness. That is an empirical claim. If it turned out that parochial concerns, parochial altruism led to more happiness, would you change your mind and be less of a universalist?
그 누구부터 말을 하십니다. 그리고 카일라이어서 나오더니요. I think that sort of conclusion, I think, may be based on the some country, their ideology is socialism. Think more, care more about other. That, I think, and other hand, capitalism. Think oneself, mainly individual initiative. And capitalism itself also is not necessarily to bring healthy society. Capitalism with freedom, and independent judiciary, and free press. I think many factors involved. Then the individual initiative really makes significant sort of difference. Like former Soviet Union, and also you see till Deng Xiaoping's sort of economic liberalization. Before that, again, were very nice socialism, working class people. But the reality, everybody remained poor. Now these kind of taking sense of care of others' well-being, something by law or something by order, not developed within, out of awareness, not that way.
So his point is
so
that,
some kind of artificial sort of what's it, compassion. I think a sense of concern of others' well-being.
His Holiness's point is that.
So we cannot judge based on these factors. No.
So, like Adam Smith's observation and the point you are making about the universalism, maybe perhaps based on perception of a certain systems, like the socialist system, where there was an imposition of a universalistic view from the top, whereas the kind of universalism that His Holiness is promoting with respect to compassion is very different from the one that we saw in the experiments of the socialist system.
This issue about the wise, selfish person, which is, I think, a very interesting issue. And I wonder whether the idea that you have that the interests of people very distant from me are my interests. I'm wondering the degree to which you think that that's a secular idea, or whether it's fundamentally a Buddhist idea.
Both. I think one difference is, according Buddhist practitioner, not only concerned about this world, but limitless other world. That's the differences. Secular, when we are talking only this world. Kada shen tsawa chawar saya di chimbar wanda, di kanda. Dia rang jizing nimi di shen jizing yenda sabi kaduli ya kiawa ngaji ke shen mada. Yundi menga tu shen yenda dili yungwari. That's my view. 나 가르쳐서 한다. 되게 가르쳐 내서. I think your sort of explanation. From Buddhist viewpoint, and not only Buddhism in general, and particularly the one Buddhist tradition, also you see, make distinction, a different level of consciousness or different level of mind. So grosser level of mind, entirely based on neurons, brains, these things. More subtler consciousness, more subtler mind, more subtler, more independent. Then, because of the grosser of brain, like that. So that also, when we talk about mind, its own world, so many variety, so many sort of different activities. So it is rather difficult to explain completely on the basis of brain sort of movement. So one example, the speed of brain movement, I think slower than light.
The chemical activity, the speed.
I think slower than light.
And the speed of light. Yeah.
The mental movement, faster than light. So that shivuji nyubu dongeti tabu chengeji twane deshe chasana judo khawshare.
So the point His Holiness is making is that given the speed of thought, and also given the speed of the electrical activity and the level of brain, which seems to be slower than the speed of light, conceptually, it is difficult to say that all the explanations of the mental processes can be, comprehensively given on the basis of the processes of brain.
But certainly, I think brain activities direct link with sensorial level of consciousness. Usually I think much sort of much relying on sensorial level of mind. Of course, each sensorial experience, the mental experience also used to come. But that experience entirely depends on sensorial the mind. So then, I think during dream, when even further sort of the subtler, without dream, deep sleep, through training, you can utilize certain intelligence during dream, during deep sleep. But usual brain are the because of some brain
So in those,
this
is of course a matter for research, but in those states at very subtle level of consciousness, in dream or in deep sleep, when experienced practitioners deliberately bring awareness into these moments, His Holiness would conjecture the brain activity will be very different from the normal activities that you will see when there is consciousness.
I think I think we can examine some individual without any training. From Buddhist viewpoint, due to previous life certain habit. So some people have this more ability to recognize dream is dream, while person dreaming, still aware. Now, this is not real, this is dream state. Not necessarily through training. I met with some people who have that kind of ability. So, to do brain dida, dream brain
So, as part of research, we also need to know how the brain expressions differ between an individual who is lucid dreaming and while maintaining the awareness, as opposed to someone who is simply dreaming without awareness.
And that, if I may respond, it's perfectly possible, it's perfectly within the realm of our research. By the way, I realize that I didn't convince you 20 years ago, and we still have a ways to go. But I said that I didn't convince His Holiness 20 years ago of my point of view, which is perfectly fine, because that's what science exists for, is to test. Yeah. We had a similar conversation 20 years ago, and
There is a saying in the Tibetan epistemological tradition that it's very important for protagonists in discussion to have your own firm standpoints.
The only problem is that with science, our standpoint has to change as the science goes along, so sometimes that gets very complicated. But I basically entirely agree with you. I think that the point is that brain science today cannot fully explain states of mind and states of consciousness fully, which does not mean that our project should not be, at least for those who think like me, that we should try. And of course, if we fail, we fail, and then we'll have to invoke other explanations. But there is a possibility of advancing, and the mention of lucid dreaming is an interesting one, because lucid dreaming and dreaming in general, by those that are not so trained to have lucid dreams and to recognize or orient their dreams, is perfectly accessible to brain research, and you do it with electrophysiological techniques. I think that sooner or later imaging techniques will also get there, but it's a very important point to study.
Say the very purpose of my discussion with scientists, two things. One, simply extend our knowledge, including my own knowledge. So you see different subject, like cosmology, or biology, the biology you've got that. Quantum physics. See, the Buddhist scriptures also used to touch this subject. So, it is really interesting to learn from latest scientific finding. And Big Bangs, all these things, very, very helpful. Then also you see about mind, about emotion. Here also you see a purpose to extend our knowledge. Also there. As a result of, I think now, I think almost 30 years sort of because of the discussion with scientists, it seems the modern science sort of knowledge about emotion, different categories, sort of its own sort of system. And these things compare Indian traditional sort of the explanation, I think still beginning. So from ancient Indian thought about mind, about emotion, and its own system, more and more discussion with modern scientists in this field, their interest growing. So they got some benefit. Then another purpose, the scientific sort of research, scientific finding or knowledge is really remarkable. I often used to telling people, last few thousand years, I think 3,000-4,000 years, people, different part of the world, of course, certain their goal, certain their wish, you see, they, to achieve that, simply relying on prayer to God, to Allah, to Buddha, like that. So more or less, I think not fulfill that wish. That last 200 years, the science developed, and with that, technology developed. And some of the goal which we 1,000 years just to pray, now immediately materialize. So wonderful, but meantime, the time, with help of science and technology, also bring more fear. Like today, some Japanese people in certain area usually facing some extraordinary sort of fear because of the development of science and technology. And overall, I think war is part of human history. War means mobilized violence or murder. But 1,000 years, war there, but destruction is limited. Since last about more than 100 years, technology brought power of destruction because of the immense. So as a result, the destruction of war much increased. The last century, 20th century, according to some historians, they say over 100 millions of people, or 200 millions of people killed through violence, through war. Here, this scientific sort of knowledge and technology really made immense sort of a factor like that. So therefore, this wonderful thing which we human beings invented, now in order to that become more constructive role, the sense of here, moral ethics, ultimately based on compassion, sense of care, our knowledge become sort of a servant of compassion, then very good. Our knowledge becomes servant of hatred and very dangerous. So, the moral ethics, not talking about next life, not talking about God, whether there's God or not, whether there's next life or not, doesn't matter. Our concern is our world, today's world. So there's another sort of purpose. Like that.
So His Holiness was trying to share with you the kind of the underlying motive on his part, why he's spending so much time talking to scientists from different disciplines.
only psychology of these things, but also other things. Okay, yes, further questions?
Well, we've been talking a little bit about conflict and about living together here in Los Angeles. One of the fascinating things about Los Angeles is so many Buddhist traditions living together. And in fact, in no city in Asia can you find so many Buddhists of different types. Tibetans living next to Thai, living next to Korean and Japanese. And actually, in terms of global cities, in some sense, Los Angeles is the world's most religiously diverse city as a whole. And I wonder if His Holiness could direct us a little bit in our thinking about living together with other religious people, because there's one method which you suggested, you find a non-religious basis, a secular ethics for living together. But I wonder when we have now seen something of a change in our theory about secularization. It used to be thought that as science progressed and as civilizations became more advanced, people would become less and less religious and more secular. And this is one reason why a secular ethic may be interesting. But I think the facts show that in fact there's a kind of rise in religion. And it's not that it's, as we advance, religion just drops off. So I wonder if His Holiness could say something about the role of interreligious encounter and pluralism and tolerance, especially in a city like Los Angeles, and thinking about how do we find common ethical frameworks and ground.
I think firstly, our main sort of purpose, talking take place in Los Angeles, but not meant for only people around here. We should include a large number of Chinese people in China. Many of them deliberately, because try to be non-believer. So in any way, I think nearly 7 billion human population. I think if not majority, but certainly major portion of the population, I think essentially non-believer, isn't it? One day, my friend, one European, one Dutch, he advisor of many multi-companies, multinational company. One day we discussed something. Actually, we wrote a book with his help. He initiated that book. So in any way, one occasion I mentioned to him, the moral principle based on fearing of God. I mentioned to him, and he said, that's 18th century's talk. 18th century's sort of idea. So that means in the European continent, at least, you see, many people don't care about religion, about religious sort of concept like that. So I think here, few hundred people, I think you may go church or synagogue from time to time. Out of my curiosity, those people who often, you see, go to church and synagogue and some other Raise hand. And also including Buddhist temple and Islam mosque. But majority Shimos one. So the Los Angeles me marbe. Love to go get it.
So we are here in Los Angeles.
So in any way, my point is, even those people who believe God or Allah, including Buddhists, who believe Buddha Dharma Sangha, when you see their daily life carry greed, their lack of self-discipline, and fighting with others, no hesitation to cheat, telling lie. So these people occasionally go to temple and pray to God, but don't care. Their real life sort of carry. So therefore, even among the religious believer, still we need more education. The altruism or altruistic action is the basis of healthy society, healthy family, healthy individual. And then, this morning I mentioned, according to Indian sort of concept, secularism does not mean disrespect religion or distance from religion. No. Like a father of India, Mahatma Gandhi, and many other, like the first Indian president, and also some other, say, individually, very much religious-minded. But these people are key figure drafting Indian constitution, which based on secularism. So, individual level, very much sort of believer, religious-minded. But they are looking to the society. They feel secularism is most fit. So secularism respects all religions, including non-believer. Meantime, stress importance of moral ethics. So that not against religious sort of, because of that religion, and then also these basic sort of moral ethics are the point which we are talking about, secular ethics. These are the essence of all major religions. So, I think we can say all the major religious tradition of human being, all based on moral ethics. So, promotion of moral ethics, also the different way to serve dharma or religion. Once you develop genuine interest about love and compassion, then all your traditional religion, they talk these things. As I mentioned earlier, the Muslim believe Allah, creator. And because of the belief Allah, which is infinite love, so therefore, all the creature created by infinite love, we must, because of the respect and love, like that. So then use different sort of philosophical view, but the goal is same, strengthening these values. So that also the basis of religious harmony. Or then secularism. I think if we look carefully, many Buddhist literature look at the secular.
For example, if we look carefully, among the Buddhist texts, there are certain texts that are referred to as and pertaining to norms of human behavior. So these are all secular.
And then naturally, you see, I often use it from Buddhist viewpoint. I often use it telling people the Pali tradition, Sanskrit tradition, particularly Sanskrit tradition, you will find different sort of views, different philosophical views, or different views about ultimate reality of self, ultimate reality of phenomena, there. All these major different views based on Buddha's own word. So therefore, the contradictory philosophical view taught by one teacher, that's Buddha. So I usually jokingly telling people, these contradictory philosophy come from same person, is certainly not out of Buddha's own confusion. Not very certain. One day he taught something, and next day he taught something, not or because of the alcohol drunk. Not like that. Then another possibility, Buddha deliberately tried to create more confusion among his disciples. No. Then answer is, conclusion is, because among his disciples there are different mental dispositions. Therefore, one philosophical view not suitable for all his disciples, because mental disposition. So it needs different views about the reality, like that. So then, of course, Buddha's teaching, you see, the main sort of one of the important sort of view is no soul theory. That's the real demarcation between Buddhism and non-Buddhism. But among Buddha's sort of teaching, some teaching indicated there could be soul. 나보 산제베 다음에 다와 실샤베 낭베 추기 싸워디다 무치부치기 풍부한 쿠르쿠르보네 강사고 숨도.
Even though rejection of self, independent self, is seen as a kind of a characteristic of the Buddha's teaching, but even Buddha's own words, there are instances where he seems to suggest that a notion of self may be relevant. For example, there is a passage which says that the physical and mental constituents are the burden, and the self is the carrier of that burden.
So therefore, according to the Buddhist way of thinking, then today there are a variety of sort of people who have mental disposition. So some people have serious interest or genuine interest about religion. Very good. They have sufficient sort of material to cultivate these sort of warm-heartedness on these things. Then let them practice pay more attention. Then there are also non-believers. So these are also human brothers and sisters. I think in 20th century, some of these serious troublemakers like Stalin or like Hitler, I don't think they are genuine believer. Religious believer, no. Chairman Mao, his family, both I think Chiang Kai-shek and Chairman Mao Zedong, both come from Buddhist family. Both mother Buddhist. But they deliberately, then of course Chiang Kai-shek eventually become Christian because of the marriage. So his wife truly become his guru. So then Chairman Mao Zedong, because of certain sort of circumstances, certain ideology, eventually become communist, like that. So communist, not necessarily anti-religious sort of concept. Communism, not necessarily against religion. In India, And also in Italy, I found some local communist party member. They are not against religion. Communism or Marxism is simply a socio-theory or socio-economic theory. And of course, nowadays in China, some of the top communist party actually Buddhist or some Christians. But Chairman Mao Zedong, once he told me, Buddhism or all religion, and particularly Buddhism, is poison. He directly told me. I think, some extent, I cheated him. Not intentionally. So he believed, you see, religion is just blind faith. So scientific knowledge increase, religious belief automatically will go. So he once told me, your mind is a very scientific way of thinking. Then he mentioned religion is poison. But I think later part of 20th century, even those sort of materialistic sort of thinking, or people who only interested about material value, began to feel something missing. Some my friend, I think a billionaire or millionaire, very rich, but really they're really facing some problems in mental level. In China also, I was told, becoming more richer, more fund, keep some sacred sort of statue in their home. And then science itself. Previously, I think early part of 20th century, scientists always remain distant from religious belief. Individually, maybe religious-minded, my quantum physics teacher, one German, half philosopher, half scientist, the physicist. I think he himself very religious-minded, but in his field, like Varela always say, religious gap and scientific gap.
Varela is a long-term friend, late Francisco Varela, used to often talk about whatever perspective he's representing, is that he would put the cap on. Now I'm speaking as a scientist.
So like that, you see, they completely separate. No? Now, later part of 20th century, and nowadays, you see, among the scientists, you see, I think open their mind, about training of mind. Little change. Like that. So, sorry, too long. Monday again,
Some of which maybe may have been not that relevant to the discussion. You want to follow up? Yes.
I'd like to ask Professor Haidt, and then after Professor Yaffe, and then after Professor Damasio, but first Professor Haidt.
In thinking about secular ethics and how we could have a society in which people treat each other well and humanely without any particular established religion, I think it's very useful for us to think about the nations of the world, some of which are doing very well. They are humane societies. Others are doing very, very badly. People are treated terribly. Atrocities are everyday occurrences. I think this is not because the people in some nations are very altruistic and the people in others are not compassionate altruistic. This is because some nations have chosen very good forms of government, they have very strong social institutions, and they have economic institutions and mechanisms that work as well. If tomorrow the Chinese said, oh, we were wrong, let us all leave Tibet, let all the Tibetans in exile come back, a government is formed, you're an advisor to the Tibetan government, what would you advise them? How would you set up a secular society in Tibet? Is that what you would do? And would it be socialist, capitalist? What would you do?
Between socialism and capitalism, I'm a socialist. There's no question. And furthermore, I always say, describe myself as a Marxist. There's no secret. But not Leninist. In my mind, Marxism, I think the only economic theory where express the sense of concern about equal distribution. That's a moral thing. Whereas capitalism, how to make profit? Only that. And in order to get more profit, no hesitation to exploit. I think, I think 1 decade or 2 decades, your capitalist, I think, some extent use exploitation in cheap labor in China. So therefore, I'm Marxist. But at the same time, since Lenin, the ideology secondary, power is the number one. It's wrong. So then develop or create a society where full of suspicion, full of fear. What use that? What kind of socialism? I met some Chinese from Taiwan. I mean, some of my old friends. I think last year, I met some of them, and I asked, nowadays, from mainland China, the number of students, number of businessmen, and also some tourists. So generally, what kind of impression they got? Then they told me, some Chinese from mainland China, after they spent a longer period in Taiwan, then they express, now in this country or in this land, no fear. Whereas in their own land, constant fear, suspicion, watching each other. So they say they really wish settle in Taiwan. So all these faults develop. The Marxist ideology used for power. That, I think, that's the real mistake. So therefore, of course, in the future, although definitely only question of time, things will change. The people from China today compare 30 years ago, 40 years ago, much change. So change will continue. Even Prime Minister Wajaba, he openly stated China need more political reform, political liberalization. He openly stated. So things are changing. But when it happened, I don't know. So, the
short answer is that when the time comes, then he will act in response to the need and appropriateness of the situation.
If I may follow up.
Basically, as I said earlier,
Yes.
you see,
Okay.
I think when we look whole global level, this gap, rich and poor, very serious matter. And China, most populous nation, huge gap, rich and poor. In India, your own home, also my own home. So, just the other day, I saw one article in Kazakh, International Kazakh, Herald Tribune. I saw the India sort of economy booming, not much effect to poorer section of the people. I always emphasize in India, the real transformation of India must take place in rural area. In India, basically farmland, and China as well. So the millions of farmers, they are through education, through training, their way of life, some change we need. And through that way, progress should take in rural area. Then that's real sort of meaningful change of India, as well as China.
Good question. So, Your Holiness, you say that Marxism is one of the only theories that expresses a concern for everyone, including the poor. That is admirable. Are you more interested in the concerns a philosophy expresses or in the outcomes that it produces? Marxism is based on the idea of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. As a psychologist, I would say this is so contrary to human nature that if you run a society on this basis, you're guaranteeing that people generally will not work and will become rather dependent. It is a disaster, I would say. So my question to you is, if as an empirical fact it turned out that a Marxist government pretty much inevitably ends up with shortages, poverty, secret police forces, and an enormous amount of hierarchy, would you renounce Marxism?
Oh. Well, when the Eastern European countries, formerly communist country, after they got freedom, I had the opportunity to visit these countries. Then I express, now time come, try to develop a new economic system, which is synthesize some of the ideas of socialism, also should include, then dynamic force in the capitalism also should adopt. So some kind of synthesize, sort of new sort of a new way I express. First I express in Prague, then Czechoslovakia, because my visit, you see, invited by President Havel. Oh, wonderful person, really wonderful person. So that's my feeling. But I myself, not an economist. I don't know. My knowledge about how to make money is zero. I can know if few money in my pocket, then how can I should use that, I know. But how to make that money, I don't know. In any way, I think this, unless we pay more attention about this gap, even in the United States, number of billionaire increasing, still some section of poor people, even in Washington, the capital, the suburb of the Washington, number of poor people. And this gap creates some kind of unsatisfaction or resentment. Resentment transforms frustration. Frustration then transforms anger. Then that creates violence. So we must. This is not only morally wrong, but practically also, you see, source of problem. We have to pay more attention than global level, Southerner and Northerner. Huge sort of differences. Like that. So something lacking. There are existing sort of existing sort of take for granted, just go like that. Some individual, more ability, more vision, become rich. Absolutely, they are right. But not on forget these poorer section of the people. So we must pay more attention in the southern world. But what kind of real system, I don't know. So I think you are economist or social scientist. I think you should think more and find out certain plan. And then also, you see, the secularism. Another reason the secularism is important is the religion is up to individual individual matter. Then secularism is a matter of the whole humanity. So religion, since you see private individual business, so the church and synagogue and these the mosque, temple, they take care. And secularism, and also secularism is universal. Religion, not universal. Ethics, which based on religion, then what religion? I think the very reason Indian constitution based on secularism is Indian society last, I think, 2,000 to 3,000 years, multi-religious community. So if the constitution based on one religion, then what religion? So therefore, there's no other choice except secularism. Respect all religion, but that's individual business. So therefore, so in different countries, some cases, you see the teaching, education should be secular. So now we need the promotion of moral ethics, not just a few lectures or a few discussion, but in our education system should include, so that people from kindergarten up to university level, there's some awareness, some teaching, some explanation, some discussion about the value of these inner quality, the values. So, and then also it becomes universal. So whether in Africa, whether in Europe, whether in Europe, or whether in Latin America or Asia, in everywhere, education is common, universal, like arithmetic, mathematics. So like that. So therefore, we need, you see, actually, you see, there's some people now working how to introduce in secular education system the moral ethics according secular way. So we are some working, some research work. So that also is one. We need more healthy society, if possible, more compassionate society. Whether 100% of people become compassionate or not, at least big portion in the society, through education, through awareness, not through God's bless or Buddha's bless, simply through awareness, they realize some kind of the importance or important role in a happy society or inequality through education. I think that's the only way to promote. What do you think? Do you agree or do you argue? Thank you. Yes? Sorry.
So I think that at this point there's something that neuroscience can contribute to the conversation, which is the following. We're talking about secular ethics. We're talking about good behavior, good moral behavior. And we all know that it is very difficult to acquire and to implement and to maintain in a society. And it makes me think of this fundamental distinction between the learning of facts and the learning of skills. We all know about facts that we can learn and can tell us, for example, about the history of peoples. But we also have a class of learning that has to do with skills, such as learning to ride a bike or learning to play a musical instrument. It turns out that only in part does one transfer to the other. You may know all the details about how to play the piano or the cello, and that doesn't mean that you will ever be able to play either. You may know about how to ride a bike, but if you go on the bike and try to do it with that factual knowledge and not by having a learning curve of trial and error, you will never learn that skill. And with moral skills, I think very much the same happens. They need to be practiced. They need to be gradually trained so that they can be deployed without us knowing that they are being deployed. Because the great secret of riding a bike or playing an instrument is that it becomes second nature to you. You don't think about the technique. You just do it. And moral behavior is very much the same way. You need to learn enough of the infrastructure so that you can deploy it naturally without thinking, I should do this because it's so good for my friend or for that person that is far away. And I think that it made me think for a second that when we talk about the relationship between religions and secular ethics, one of the reasons why religions have to a great extent been maintained and even been successful on many occasions has to do with the fact that they contribute to the disciplining, they contribute to the acquisition of moral skills. So it doesn't follow that you need religions to acquire moral skills, but all things being equal, it may help in certain circumstances. So,
Dia ko dia dia. Ro. Tero. Ro. Some moral di umar se. What did it? Did it? Oh. Oh yes. Yes. I think the physical level of action, verbal level of action, mental level of action, three different sort of categories. So among these actions, some spontaneous, some need attention. And there also is two categories. One, I think due to biological factor, attention immediately is to come. When you feel hungry, no need meditation. Just I feel hungry, I want to eat something. When I walk, oh, there is some danger because of the resistance. These, there are attention, but no need cultivate. Then some, even mental action, Toma, Shiva, Tene, Neva, Tene, Kumsadamba.
With relation to some of the ethical kind of principle,
or mental action,
with relation to mental, particularly mental attitudes and so on, there might be some which would require a kind of a disciplined process, so that initially you cultivate the intellectual understanding of it, then
learning.
First through learning, learning the value, and then secondly,
constant sort of research, constant sort of investigate. Through that way, you get conviction. Now, this mental action is truly benefit to myself or other, mainly to myself, for long-term interest. Then that, firstly, not come automatically, but gradually through familiarize, through practice, then become almost spontaneous or automatic. So like physical action. And then you see scientific sort of research or scientific finding. One of the main reason for promotion of ethics, secular ethics, I use 3 points. Number one, our common sense, common experience. We all born from mother. We all receive maximum affection from our mother, even before language, just after birth. We tremendously feel we develop a tremendous sort of appreciation of or sense of safety when mother take care, mother show affection. At that time, no idea who is that person, but biological factor like that. So that experience really absorbed imprint in our blood, in our mind. So I think here, I think few hundred people, outwardly all smart, but in deeper insight, those individuals who receive maximum affection from one's own mother, I think deep insight, more sense of more secure, more happier. Then those individuals may be very good educated and very rich, very powerful, but at the time of that very young age, little sort of less affection, or some cases even abuse. So in deep insight, some sense of insecure, sense of distance from other. If we carry research, I think those was awful sort of the cruel people. I think if we check the whole sort of record, I think most of these at the early age, lack of affection. So these people, because of their own experience, showing to other affection, difficult. So that's our common experience. Then common sense. Even same family, one family member, mentally more compassionate, that person much more happy. And the family where I think 2 years ago when global economic crisis happened, I'm quite sure those people in village, in farm area, they carry their daily sort of work, some protection, and very sense of good neighbor and happy family. I think a global economic crisis, less effect on their emotion, I feel, than those individuals who in big city, big office, and thousands, 100,000 employees, perhaps much more sort of restlessness, much more impact. So there's common sort of common sense, if you use common sense. Then third, most important, scientific finding. I heard from scientists, that the constant fear, constant anger, actually very harmful to sustain our immune system. Absolutely. So, more happier, more calm mind, very good sustain these body element. And then also, say one time, one scientist mentioned 2 mouse, both injured, but one with another the mouse who constantly leaking. Other remain lonely, alone. So the speed of recovery, the other mouse which constantly receive leaking, expression of affection, much more faster recover. So these, the scientific finding, more calm mind, more positive emotion, your health better improve. And also best measure prevent illness is mind always fresh and clear. Very important method, very important factor for preventive measure. So, regarding promotion of secular ethics, real guru is scientist, not Buddha or not God or not Allah, but these scientists, they actually experiment. Then they found for physical well-being, the emotion, something very important factor. So, thank you to scientists.
It's certainly true that anger and stress in general are not good for your health, and that joy and happiness are. And there's a fundamental difference between what are nourishing emotions and emotions that are in fact destructive. And they're not just destructive for your mind, which they are, they're destructive for your body. They, whenever you have anger, whenever you are deeply frustrated and in fear, you are in fact damaging your blood vessels, you're risking heart disease, higher blood pressure, and a variety of other consequences. Your immune system doesn't function as well, and you're at much higher risk for infectious diseases and even for some cancers. So there's no question that emotions, to begin with, are a reflection of the state of our organism, of the state of our physiology, and there's a range of balances where it can be. It can be near balance or not. And if it is too much on the negative side, it is destructive, and if it goes too much for the ultra-positive side and you go into a manic state, it's not so good either. So there's an ideal level of regulation, which I like to call the up-regulation towards well-being, which makes me think of another interesting point, which is that we very often talk about evolution, biological evolution, as being based exclusively on competition, when it's quite clear that cooperativity is also very important. But we also think of it as, in a very narrow way, as producing survival. Well, who in this room would like to just survive in a neutral, affective state? We don't want that. We want to survive in a state where there is at least a modicum of well-being. So I believe that, in fact, the story of how that operates is not just about survival, but survival with an upregulation towards well-being. That is something that our organisms naturally strive for, and that, of course, can be destroyed either for reasons that come from within or for reasons that come from the environment in which we live. But I think that's an important point to make.
Positive emotion, that day some to I see. I see.
One more question?
Yeah, the common issue was
Sorry.
The positive emotion, as I mentioned, morning and also here, they're like, even is like compassion. There are two levels, one biological, one through training. With help, that means with help of awareness, then deliberately cultivate. So most cases, these sort of positive emotion based very sound reasons. So I think under the positive emotion, Gabriel could not get drivers.
Professor, you mentioned that just as when you wear too much to the negative side of emotions, it affects your health and well-being. Similarly, if you go to the other extreme of the positive emotions, that might also have negative effect. So His Holiness wanted to just make the point that when we talk about positive emotions, there are certain types of positive emotions which are deliberately cultivated based upon sound reason. So maybe we need to distinguish between the more instinctual kind and those that are deliberately cultivated.
I think this morning I mentioned, you see, religious believer, you see, respect or love your own religion, but should not develop attachment. So, sound looks, attachment towards your own religion. Looks right, okay. But emotional level, or too much attachment, too much biased attitude. So, that kind of love is blind love, blind respect or love. So genuine attachment, genuine sort of what's the love, compassion, unbiased one, develop or come on the basis of detach. One side, too much attachment, too much love. One side, hatred, must equal. So the hatred 대체에 love 봐. 셋다음에 대장배 세워줘 봐. 디 매우소.
So in the case of the second level compassion that we are, I'm talking about, there one needs to go beyond the usual dichotomy of hatred versus love, so that there is no extreme discriminations, and move beyond that.
So therefore, sorry, waste of time. So when we talk about mind, we need sort of precision, right? And made sort of detailed sort of map about mind, about emotion. I think we need some sort of more information, more knowledge. Then we develop, I think, real ability to distinguish or to take some emotion, to get rid of some emotion. Even looks positive, but too much attachment looks okay, but actually based on ignorance, not wisdom. Unbiased sort of love, based on reason, based on wisdom. So further development, no harm. One-sided, limited love, too much attachment, often brings hate, anger. Of course, I'm not experienced or there's a great knowledgeable experts on this field. But since my childhood, I study this sort of material. Then, since my childhood, I always curiosity, why it happened? What is that? What is that? Always. So that also quite helpful to develop sort of more answer, more curiosity, more suspicion, more skeptical, bring more questions. More question brings more investigation. More investigation, you will find more answer. So just faith, or someone told, oh, that must be true. It is wrong. We must be skeptical in order to utilize our intelligence properly. Skepticism is important. Okay? Now, in both. Very good, very good, very good. Thank you. Oh, yes, yes.
As you can see, moderating this panel is not hard work. All I have to do is be silent and listen to 6 wise men speak. To offer some closing words, I'd like to invite to the stage the Venerable Tenzin Priyadashi, who is the founding director of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT, which is a secular, non-partisan organization directly set up to promote investigations and discussions such as this. The Venerable Tenzin Priyadashi entered a Buddhist monastery in India at the age of 10, and he was ordained by His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Thank you. Your Holiness, distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this gathering was to catalyze a paradigm shift in how we understand, develop, educate, and disseminate ethics in society at large. We stand at crossroads. Many of us look around in disbelief at the chain of global events from climate change to economy to governance. His Holiness's call to develop a system of secular ethics is a wake-up call if we are to continue to flourish as a humane society. Recently, I turned to one of my favorite social commentators, Calvin and Hobbes. For the professors, it's found in the comic section of the newspaper. And Calvin creates a flowchart on how conflict is drama, drama is entertainment, and entertainment is marketable. Hence, people do not like civilized dialogue to build common grounds, but that everyone wants to see fireworks. Most socio-political conversations, talk shows and the like, reflect this phenomena where nothing gets solved, but everyone is entertained. His Holiness's approach is that of a problem solver. His notion of secular simply exemplifies the age-old Indian notion of secular as sarva dharma sambhav, a method of dialogue and discourse where we do not exclude people of foreign belief or tradition, or those with no belief at all. Secular ethics builds a platform for acceptance so that we do not merely tolerate one another and continue to develop porcupinal groups and societies pointing sharp objects to be modest, towards one another or towards those who do not agree with us. The challenge at hand is whether we have the individual and the collective will to cultivate an ethical framework which allows us to behold another person with empathy, with compassion, with dignity, with love, and with respect. This is not merely a question of aptitude or biological design, but of training and cultivation. MBA students were trained in ethics, but just not enough. Do not perceive ethics to simply be a restraining mechanism, as in legal and compliance framework, but view it as a process of human flourishing and optimization. What are we evolving to become? On behalf of the USC Interfaith Council, the Dalai Lama Foundation, and the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT, I extend my deepest appreciation to the University of Southern California for hosting this event. An event such as this is born out of love and dedication of many, whom I cannot thank enough or individually. I thank the DSS and the local police and security officials for ensuring the safety of all, the Office of Tibet, New York, and the private office of His Holiness in India has our sincerest appreciation for coordinating this visit. I thank the panelists and esteemed audience for taking time and interest in supporting this wonderful endeavor. Perhaps each one of you is inspired to deeply reflect on ways of becoming a more ethical person, parent, spouse, teacher, and citizen. Each one of you serves as a role model for many around you, especially the younger generation. So be joyful, be good, and be contagious. Last, I thank from the bottom of my heart, Your Holiness, our inspiration and fearless guide. May you be healthy, may you live long, may you continue to be a catalyst for much good for all. Thank you.